Every photograph captures a moment. Most of them are ordinary. A birthday, a holiday, a family gathering, a random snapshot taken without a second thought. But sometimes a photograph captures something else entirely. Sometimes it captures the final moments before a tragedy. I have discovered hundreds of inhumane final photographs so far, cases involving ordinary people, explorers, celebrities, adventurers, travelers, and complete strangers who had no idea their picture would become the last one ever taken of them. For this video, I wanted to bring all of those stories together into a single iceberg. If you've never seen an iceberg video before, the concept is simple. The deeper we go, the darker, stranger, and more disturbing the cases become. The stories near the surface are tragic enough on their own, but as we descend further down the iceberg, the circumstances surrounding these final photographs become increasingly difficult to comprehend. Some involve accidents, some involve disappearances, some involve mysteries that remain unsolved to this day, and some are cases that have been haunting people for decades, and maybe now they will haunt you too, as you lay down to sleep tonight. Over the next 2 hours, we'll be working our way from the tip of the iceberg all the way to its deepest levels. And fair warning, the deeper we go, the heavier these stories become. Although, to be fair, a situation that starts bad and somehow keeps getting worse for 2 straight hours does sound suspiciously similar to my average Saturday night. Let's begin at the surface level. This photograph was taken only hours before the horrifyingly powerful floodwaters arrived. In it, a group of smiling young girls stand together at Camp Mystic in the Texas Hill Country, dressed in white after evening activities, surrounded by friends, counselors, and the kind of summer atmosphere that parents trust completely. This image should be a reminder of a summer to remember forever. But for many of the girls in that photograph, it would become one of the final pictures ever taken of them alive. Camp Mystic had operated near the Guadalupe River for generations and was viewed by many families as a tradition passed between mothers, daughters, and sisters. The youngest campers stayed in a low-lying section of the camp known as the Flats, where cabins with names like Bubble Inn and Twins sat close to the river and near the camp's central activity areas. Many of the children there were only 8 or 9 years old and were attending summer camp away from home for the first time. On the evening of July 3rd, 2025, the girls attended activities, climbed Chapel Hill overlooking the river, and eventually returned to their cabins for the night. Then, during the early hours of July 4th, the weather changed dramatically. Around 1:30 a.m., thunder began cracking across the camp, and the power reportedly failed shortly afterward. The girls were plunged into darkness, with only battery-powered torches if they were lucky. By roughly 2 a.m., counselors in cabins closest to the river were already reporting water entering the buildings. Camp staff began waking children and rushing some girls toward higher ground inside the recreation hall, while others climbed hills behind the cabins in darkness. But near Bubble Inn and Twins, something far worse was happening. Floodwater from both the Guadalupe River and a nearby creek suddenly converged around the cabins housing many of the youngest campers. Former staff later described the water as swirling around the buildings from 2 directions at once, almost like a whirlpool consuming anything that came close. Within a short period of time, the flood rose with terrifying speed. Some survivors later said the water reached nearly to cabin ceilings, while children climbed onto bunk beds trying to stay above it. Camp director Dick Eastland reportedly drove through the darkness, attempting to rescue girls trapped inside Bubble Inn and the nearby Twins cabins. According to reports, he managed to load several children into his vehicle before the floodwaters overwhelmed it and swept the truck away. He later succumbed to the torrents during this valiant rescue attempt.
Yeah, and through the chaos, the sisters remember the bravery of the camp staff and counselors. Some gave their lives protecting their children. Among them were directors Dick and Edward Eastland. While the girls say they owe their lives to those heroes, they also carry the weight of those lost.
It's nothing short of a miracle with how quick the water rose. And even for the girls who didn't survive, I believe that Jesus was there with them, holding their hands and when the waters rose and comforting them.
Elsewhere, counsellors desperately tried to keep the children calm while guiding them through darkness, debris and violently moving water. One report claimed girls clung to clotheslines to avoid being swept away. By sunrise, the camp had become the center of one of the deadliest flood disasters in modern Texas history. Parents later arrived to scenes of devastation, searching through piles of soaked mattresses, stuffed animals, children's shoes, and waterlogged trunks decorated with stickers and handwritten names. Some fathers reportedly walked the riverbanks themselves, searching for daughters who were still missing. What makes the final group photograph so devastating is how completely normal it still looks. It simply looks like children enjoying summer camp together during a Texas summer evening. Children living what looks to be an idyllic life that most people could only dream of. And yet, within only a few hours, they would be experiencing a true nightmare. Just 10 minutes before he met his end, 15-year-old Garrett Mills was smiling for the camera. One photo showed a dandelion tucked behind his ear. Another showed him flexing his muscles and grinning alongside his friends.
They were just killing time, playing in the park like they've done so many times before. His girlfriend relayed the message to us that he actually said that afternoon he was having the best day of his life.
The three teenagers were simply passing time at a park in Ontario before Garrett's first official date later that evening. But that date would never happen. According to his father, Garrett had been showing off a little, performing chin-ups on a soccer goal crossbar while his friends watched. Then, without warning, the entire structure tipped forward. The goal was not anchored to the ground, as it should have been. Witnesses later said the heavy metal frame crashed down onto Garrett's head. The coroner concluded that his death was instantaneous. What makes the story even more unsettling is how unsuspecting this whole thing is. I remember doing almost this exact thing, and thank goodness the same didn't happen to me. Garrett's father, Dave Mills, had no idea such a danger even existed. To him, it was just a normal park. A harmless kind of place where teenagers would just hang out after school. Yet investigators discovered this older-style goalpost weighed somewhere between 180 and 200 pounds.
The Ontario coroner's office told Mills the crossbar struck Garrett on the left side of his head, killing him instantly.
I had no idea that that risk existed in a park, that this harmless park had the potential to take somebody's life.
In the space of a few seconds, an ordinary afternoon became a nightmare, and those smiling photographs taken only moments earlier became the final images ever captured of Garrett alive.
You just miss him horribly, and you want nothing more in life than to be able to bring him back, and it's the most helpless feeling any parent could ever have.
Brazilian fitness influencer and triathlete Flavia Arrojo shared a message with her followers about embracing life and making the most of every moment. It is harrowing in hindsight. Just days later, tragedy would strike during one of the biggest endurance events in the world. On April 18, 2026, the 38-year-old athlete was competing in Ironman Texas, a grueling race consisting of a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, and a full marathon. Mara was no stranger to the challenge. She had completed at least 9 Ironman events since 2018 and had built a following of more than 60,000 people online by sharing her fitness journey and passion for endurance sports. The race began early that morning in Lake Woodlands near Houston. Around 7:30 a.m., volunteers and safety personnel noticed that something was wrong. Witnesses later recalled seeing distress among nearby swimmers and hearing calls for help. According to reports, Mara had disappeared beneath the surface during the swim portion of the event. A large search operation quickly began. Volunteers, safety crews, and emergency responders searched the area while divers entered the water. The conditions reportedly made visibility extremely difficult, with murky water limiting how far rescuers could see beneath the surface. After approximately 90 minutes of searching, divers located Mara's body in about 10 feet of water. Despite rescue efforts, she was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities later confirmed Mara's identity and stated that preliminary investigations indicated she had drowned during the swimming portion of the race. A more thorough investigation was opened. The news shocked the triathlon community, particularly because Mara was an experienced competitor who had successfully completed numerous Ironman events throughout her career. Friends, fellow athletes, and followers paid tribute to her determination, positivity, and passion for pushing herself beyond her limits. Perhaps most haunting was a message she had shared shortly before the race. She wrote, "Enjoy this ride on the bullet train that is life." For many who followed her journey, those words took on a heartbreaking significance after her passing, transforming what had been intended as a motivational message into a lasting reminder of how quickly life can change. For Ankit, photography was more than a hobby. Friends described the 20-year-old Indian student as someone who loved exploring new places and capturing memories wherever he went. After arriving in Australia to study in Perth, he spent his free time travelling and taking photographs, documenting experiences he hoped to remember long after returning home. In May 2018, Ankit and a group of friends made the 5-hour journey south to visit The Gap, a famous coastal lookout near Albany in Western Australia. The location is known for its dramatic ocean views, steep cliffs, and powerful waves. Although designated viewing platforms, railings, and warning signs had been installed, visitors were often tempted to move closer to the edge for photographs. According to witnesses, Ankit had been running and moving around on the rocks while taking pictures with friends. During the visit, he lost his footing and fell more than 40 meters toward the coastline below. Witnesses reported that he struck rocks during the fall before landing near the water's edge. Moments later, a wave swept him into the ocean. Emergency services launched a major search operation involving rescue crews and a helicopter. His body was recovered from the water a little over an hour later. What makes the story especially haunting is that one of Ankit's friends captured a photograph only moments before the accident. Rather than keeping the image private, the group later chose to release it publicly. Their hope was that it would serve as a warning to others about the dangers of taking risks near cliffs and coastal viewpoints. For those who knew him, Ankit was remembered not for the tragedy itself, but as an adventurous young man who loved travel, photography, and discovering new places. His friends hoped that sharing his final photograph might prevent someone else from making the same mistake. This one is all about the contrast in the images. Everyone knows how the story ends. What people don't think about is the fact that for most of that morning, it felt like one of the happiest days of those astronauts' lives. On the morning of January 28, 1986, the crew of Challenger posed for photographs before launch. They smiled for the cameras, waved to spectators, and climbed aboard what was supposed to be a routine mission into space. Among them was schoolteacher Krista McAuliffe, who had been selected from thousands of applicants and was about to become the first ordinary civilian to teach lessons from orbit. Millions of people, including countless schoolchildren, were watching. Nothing about the photograph suggests what was about to happen. The crew looked excited and confident, exactly how you would expect 7 people to look before making history. At 11:38 a.m., Challenger lifted off from Florida. For just over a minute, everything appeared normal. The shuttle climbed higher and higher into the sky, as Mission Control reported no major issues. Then, 73 seconds after launch, disaster struck. A failure inside one of the solid rocket boosters triggered a chain reaction that tore the spacecraft apart, more than 46,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. Television viewers watched in confusion as the shuttle vanished into a massive cloud. Many initially believed the crew might still be alive, but Challenger was now gone. What makes the final image so haunting is that it captures a moment when none of them knew they had minutes left to live. They had trained for years, prepared for every imaginable emergency. Yet the thing that would ultimately destroy Challenger had begun with a flaw that engineers had been warning about long before launch. And now, all these years later, those smiling photographs remain frozen in time. 7 people standing on the edge of history, completely unaware that the mission they were about to begin would become one of the most tragic moments ever witnessed on live television. There is one other image of Challenger that I want to mention too. The pod that the crew were sitting in is visible here after the explosion. At this time, the crew were believed to still be alive. At first glance, the photograph looks completely ordinary. 3 friends squeezed together for a selfie during a weekend away at a caravan park on the Northumberland coast. They are smiling, relaxed, comfortable around one another. Nothing about the image suggests that within hours, one of them would be in a shallow grave. The man smiling in the middle of the picture, 24-year-old Darren Bonner, had absolutely no idea the people standing beside him were about to become the very last people to see him alive. Darren was described by his family as loyal, trusting, and kind-hearted. His mother later called him a beautiful soul who would do anything for the people he cared about. Friends said he was easy to influence and eager to please others, especially the people that he considered family. One of those people was a man named Richard Spottiswoode. Spottiswoode owned a garage where Darren worked, and over time the two became close friends. But their relationship also revolved around criminal activity. The court later heard the pair were involved in the growing and selling of the devil's lettuce. In July 2017, Darren travelled with Spottiswoode and Spottiswoode's girlfriend, Lucy Byrne, to Cresswell Towers, which is a caravan park, where they were having a weekend vacation together, and the selfie was taken during that trip. And looking at it now, knowing what happened afterwards, I always find it amazing how an innocent picture can now deliver such dread. According to prosecutors, the atmosphere inside the caravan changed dramatically after an argument broke out between Darren and Spottiswoode. Spottiswoode had become convinced that Darren was a spy for a rival gang. Exactly what was said during the confrontation remains unclear. But sometime during the early hours of the morning, the situation turned violent. At trial, Spottiswoode admitted placing Darren in a headlock, although he claimed he was only trying to calm him down. Medical evidence later revealed the injuries were far more severe. Darren had suffered extensive bruising, marks consistent with strangulation, burst blood vessels in his face, and repeated blows from what experts described as a rod-shaped weapon. At some point, Darren stopped breathing properly, and instead of calling for help, Spottiswoode made another decision. The court heard that Darren, critically injured and unconscious, was loaded into the back of a van and driven away from the caravan park in the middle of the night. CCTV later captured the vehicle leaving the site. Spottiswoode stopped near an isolated stretch of coastline between Cresswell and Lynmouth. There, prosecutors said, he dragged Darren through a gap in a dry stone wall and placed him inside a hastily dug shallow grave hidden in undergrowth. He was stripped of all of his clothing, covered with branches and shrubbery, and left out there alone. However, the case takes an unexpected turn here because Darren was still alive, but barely hanging on to life. Hours later, a dog walker passing nearby heard what sounded like loud snoring noises coming from the undergrowth. Police were called, and when officers arrived, they discovered Darren curled in the fetal position inside the shallow grave, shivering, semi-conscious, and unable to respond properly. He had suffered catastrophic brain damage caused by a lack of oxygen during the attack, but somehow he was still fighting to survive. Darren remained in hospital for more than 2 weeks, before finally passing away from his injuries. His mother later said nurses began calling him Lionheart because of how hard he fought to stay alive. Richard Spottiswoode was convicted of Darren Bonner's murder in 2018 after a jury rejected his claim that the killing was accidental. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years before parole eligibility. Lucy Byrne, Spottiswoode's girlfriend, was cleared of murder but pleaded guilty to assisting an offender after helping cover up the crime and lying to police. She received a sentence of 30 months. For thousands of motorcyclists, the Trans-Făgărașan Highway in Romania is considered a dream road. Sharp mountain bends, towering cliffs, dense forests disappearing into the clouds. Jeremy Clarkson once called it the best road in the world, and every year riders from across Europe travel there chasing the same thing: freedom, adrenaline, and breathtaking scenery. In July 2025, one of those riders was a 48-year-old Italian man named Omar Farangzin. Friends described Omar as adventurous, warm, and full of energy. He worked at Milan's Malpensa airport, loved motorcycles, and seemed genuinely excited to be exploring Romania's mountains. In photos posted online during the trip, he smiles constantly beneath his riding helmet, clearly enjoying every second of the journey. And one detail appears over and over again in those posts: bears. Romania is home to the largest brown bear population in the European Union, and along parts of the Trans-Făgărașan highway, sightings have become strangely common. Tourists stop their cars to take pictures. Motorcyclists pull over for videos. Some people even feed the animals despite repeated warnings not to. So to many visitors, the bears almost seem calm, curious, like part of the attraction itself, an illusion that can be incredibly dangerous. Omar uploaded several photos and videos showing close encounters with bears beside the road. In one clip, he rides slowly past one of them and laughs softly to himself. In another, the animal begins slowly moving toward him while he continues filming. "It's coming towards me," he says. Watching the footage now feels deeply unsettling, because although the bear appears calm, there's a strange tension underneath the moment. The kind of tension you only notice when you already know something terrible is coming. The following day, Omar was riding through the mountains near the Vidraru Dam, a scenic tourist area surrounded by forest. Authorities later said he stopped his motorcycle near a warning sign, specifically telling visitors not to feed the bears. But for reasons nobody will ever fully understand, Omar got off the bike and approached one anyway. His phone was later recovered at the scene. Investigators found several final photographs showing the bear walking closer and closer toward him. Close-ups, images taken from only a short distance away. And then, everything changed. Witnesses said the attack happened with horrifying speed. Other bikers watched helplessly as the bear suddenly charged and dragged Omar away from the roadside, pulling him down a steep ravine nearly 260 feet deep. Emergency crews rushed to the scene, including police, firefighters, forestry teams, and mountain rescuers. But even they struggled to approach safely. One rescuer later admitted the bear remained nearby the entire time, behaving aggressively and even charging at members of the recovery team. By the time they finally reached Omar, there was nothing they could do. In contrast to the last photograph, this waterfall picture actually looks pretty chilled. A man simply standing near one of the most beautiful natural wonders on the planet. A baseball cap, t-shirt, flip-flops, a relaxed smile. On New Year's Day, 40-year-old Roy Denia was visiting Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe with friends. At some point, he stepped into an area known ominously as Danger Point, a section near the gorge where visitors often stop to take photographs. The weather had been pretty poor, with heavy rain that had left the rocks slick and treacherous. Mist from the falls drifted through the air. A friend snapped one final photograph of Roy as he walked near the edge. Seconds later, everything about the day would change. Witnesses later said they heard a blood-curdling scream. Roy had reportedly slipped on the wet rocks and lost his footing. Unable to stop himself, he slid toward the gorge before plunging more than 100 meters into the chasm below. The mist swallowed him almost instantly. Searchers rushed to the area, but there was no sign of him. What makes the story even more heartbreaking is who Roy actually was. He was a fitness instructor, a father of 4 children, a man who had recently become engaged and was making plans for the future. His partner later said she desperately hoped he had somehow survived. Maybe he'd grabbed onto a rock. Maybe he'd reached the shoreline. Maybe he was still out there waiting to be found. But that hope slowly faded, and days later, rescuers finally recovered his body from the gorge below. Today, that final photograph remains. A man standing in front of one of nature's greatest wonders, completely unaware that only seconds separated him from a fatal fall into what locals call the smoke that thunders. The final photographs of David Bowie do not look extraordinary at first glance. There is no obvious sign that one of the most influential musicians in modern history was approaching the end of his life. In many of the images taken during his final public appearances, Bowie still appears composed, stylish, and unmistakably himself. Yet, with the benefit of hindsight, those photographs carry a very different weight. For much of his career, Bowie reinvented himself repeatedly. Every few years there seemed to be a new character, a new sound, or a new artistic direction. By the early 2000s, however, he had largely stepped away from public life. Following health issues and an on-stage heart attack in 2004, Bowie became increasingly private. Many fans quietly assumed that his creative peak was behind him. What nobody knew was that Bowie still had one final act left. In 2014, he was diagnosed with liver cancer. The diagnosis was kept secret from almost everyone outside his immediate family and a handful of close collaborators. Even many of the musicians working directly alongside him had no idea he was seriously ill. While undergoing treatment, Bowie continued writing, recording, and creating with remarkable determination. As his condition worsened, his output accelerated. He completed the musical Lazarus. He worked closely with directors, choreographers, and musicians. He recorded what would become Black Star, his 26th and final studio album. Collaborators later recalled that he seemed driven by an urgent need to create, as though he still had ideas that needed to be finished before time ran out. One of the final photographs taken of Bowie came during the opening night of Lazarus in December 2015. Looking back, observers noted that he appeared slightly frailer than before, but he was still impeccably dressed and carried himself with the same quiet confidence that had defined him for decades. Few people in attendance realized they were witnessing one of the last public appearances of a cultural icon. Just a month later, on January 8, 2016, Bowie released Black Star on his 69th birthday. 2 days later, he was gone. His death shocked fans around the world because almost nobody knew he had been ill. The album suddenly transformed from a new release into something far more haunting, a farewell. In the days that followed, listeners returned to the album and began noticing details they had missed. The lyrics, the imagery, and the videos seemed filled with reflections on mortality, legacy, and the passage of time. Songs such as Lazarus took on an entirely new meaning. What had initially appeared abstract now felt deeply personal. Perhaps that is what makes Bowie's final photographs so unsettling. They show a man standing at the edge of his own story while continuing to create. They capture someone facing a reality that most people spend their lives trying not to think about, yet still choosing to make art. There is a strange mixture of sadness and admiration in those images. They remind us that no amount of talent, success, or cultural impact can stop time. But they also remind us of something else. Knowing that the end was approaching, David Bowie did not disappear. Instead, he spent his final months building one last chapter. The photographs show a man nearing the end of his journey. The work he left behind shows a man still moving forward. On August 3, 2023, in the town of Ipiranga, Brazil, Arthur Emmanuel Betancourt, age 7, was playing near his family's property when he climbed into a large pile of limestone powder that had been left nearby. Smiling at the camera and giving a double thumbs up, he appeared to be having fun, completely unaware of the danger surrounding him. What Arthur's family did not know was that powdered limestone can be extremely hazardous when inhaled. Commonly used in construction, cement production, and agriculture, the substance requires workers to wear protective equipment such as masks, gloves, and goggles. Authorities warn that breathing in large amounts of the dust can cause serious respiratory problems and other health complications. According to reports, Arthur inhaled particles from the powder while playing. Within minutes, he became seriously unwell. His family rushed him to hospital, but despite their efforts, his time on this earth had ended shortly after arrival. The heartbreaking photograph was later shared by Arthur's uncle, Romaldo, who described it as the last picture taken before the tragedy. He paid tribute to his nephew online, remembering Emmanuel as a treasured member of the family, whose life ended far too soon. The incident shocked Arthur's relatives, who said they had been completely unaware of the dangers associated with limestone powder. Following the tragedy, police opened an investigation into the circumstances surrounding his death. Arthur's story serves as a devastating reminder that everyday materials can pose serious risks when not taken seriously. A simple afternoon of play turned into an unimaginable loss, leaving a family mourning a young boy whose final photograph captured a moment of innocence and laughter just minutes before the end. This photograph is one of the most disturbing ever taken. It captures the exact moment a bride realizes she's about to lose her life. On September 26, 1999, 39-year-old Gladis Recart was getting ready for what should have been the happiest day of her life. Friends and family had gathered at her home in New Jersey. The bridesmaids were dressed. The limousines were waiting outside, and her fiancé, James Preston Jr., was already at the church, anxiously waiting for his bride to arrive. A videographer moved through the house, capturing memories of the occasion. Gladys looked radiant. A white wedding gown, a sparkling tiara, a smile that seemed like it would last the entire day. At that time, just minutes separated her from the rest of her new life as a married woman. Then, everything changed. Among the wedding preparations, an unexpected visitor appeared at the front door. His name was Agustin Garcia. He was Gladys's former partner. The two had spent years together before Gladys finally ended the relationship. Friends later described Garcia as controlling, obsessive, and unable to accept that the relationship was over. Despite the breakup, he continued inserting himself into her life, calling, watching, refusing to let go. Now, on her wedding day, he had arrived uninvited. The haunting photograph was captured only moments later. In the image, Gladys is standing in her wedding dress, but something is different. Her smile is gone. Her eyes are fixed on something beyond the camera. Her face is frozen in confusion, fear, and disbelief. What she is looking at is Agustin Garcia, the man she thought was part of her past, the man who had just walked into her home carrying a briefcase. It's difficult to look at the image without knowing what comes next, because you can almost see the realization spreading across her face. Something is clearly, terribly wrong. According to prosecutors, Garcia opened the briefcase and pulled out a revolver. Family members screamed. Guests rushed forward. Chaos erupted inside what had been a joyful morning only seconds earlier. In front of relatives, friends, and even Gladys's own son, Garcia opened fire. The woman who had spent the morning preparing for her wedding collapsed before she ever made it to the church. Her fiancé remained waiting for her arrival, unaware that she would never walk through those doors. Garcia was eventually convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But this image survives. The exact second a joyful future disappears. A bride standing in her wedding dress, realizing that the happiest day of her life is about to become the worst. In the spring of 1980, photographers, scientists, and curious hikers began gathering around Mount St. Helens in Washington state. For weeks, the volcano had been showing signs that something was wrong. Small earthquakes rattled beneath the mountain, steam vents opened across the landscape, and slowly, almost unnaturally, a huge bulge began growing on the volcano's northern side as pressure built deep underground. Most people watched from a safe distance, but one man kept coming back closer and closer. This man's name was Robert Lansburg. He was a 48-year-old freelance photographer from Portland, Oregon, and he had become fascinated by the mountain. Day after day, he documented the subtle changes around Mount St. Helens, hiking through the wilderness with his camera, capturing images of a volcano that seemed alive. Friends later said he was deeply committed to his craft. Patient, observant, the kind of photographer willing to wait hours for a single perfect shot. And on the night of May 17, 1980, he camped near the volcano once again. preparing for another morning of photography. Before going to sleep, he wrote something unsettling in his journal. Feel right on the verge of something. Hours later, he was right. At 8:32 on the morning of May 18th, a powerful earthquake struck beneath Mount St. Helens, and in an instant, the entire side of the mountain collapsed. What followed was almost unimaginable. The eruption released energy equivalent to hundreds of nuclear bombs. A massive pyroclastic flow, a superheated cloud of ash, gas and rock, exploded outward at nearly 400 miles per hour, flattening forests and swallowing everything in its path. Witnesses described the scene as apocalyptic. One volcanologist radioed the words, "Vancouver, Vancouver, this is it." Then his transmission went silent forever. Robert Lansburg was less than 4 miles from the summit, far too close to escape. The ash cloud was already racing toward him faster than any human could run. And yet, instead of panicking, Lansburg did something extraordinary. He continued to take photographs. As the enormous black cloud consumed the landscape around him, he continued documenting the eruption frame by frame, capturing some of the final images before the mountain overtook him. Then, realizing he only had seconds left, Lansburg made one final decision. He removed the film from his camera, placed it carefully inside a canister, buried it deep in his backpack, and then laid his body over it to protect it from the unimaginable heat. Moments later, the pyroclastic flow reached him. He died instantly. 17 days later, rescuers finally found Robert Lansburg's body buried beneath layers of ash and debris, and underneath him, they discovered the backpack. The film inside had survived. Against all odds, the photographs were still intact. When the images were finally developed, they revealed something haunting. Frame after frame of a dark ash cloud growing larger and closer with every shot. You can almost feel the final moments through the photographs. A man standing face to face with one of the most violent natural disasters in American history, still determined to preserve what he was seeing until the very end. For years, Andy Lewis had built a reputation as one of the most recognizable figures in extreme sports. Known to many as Sketchy Andy, he had become famous for pushing physical limits in ways that most people would never consider. He held world titles in slacklining, set a Guinness World Record, and even appeared alongside Madonna during the 2012 Super Bowl halftime show. Yet in Moab, Utah, he had become just as well known for something else, introducing ordinary people to the world of tandem base jumping. One of those people was Barry Flint. In 2021, Flint booked a tandem jump with Lewis through Base Jump Moab. Despite the intimidating nature of stepping from the edge of a cliff, hundreds of feet above the ground, Flint later said he never felt unsafe. He remembered Lewis carefully inspecting every piece of equipment, checking harnesses, tightening straps, and explaining exactly what would happen. According to Flint, Lewis approached the experience with meticulous attention to detail. Once everything was ready, Lewis simply led him to the edge, counted down, and the pair stepped into open air. The experience left a lasting impression. Flint described it as feeling completely different from skydiving. Rather than fear, he remembered a sensation of freedom and calm. Afterwards, he spent time talking with Lewis and came away, feeling as though he had known him for years. The jump reinforced Lewis's reputation as someone who combined extraordinary athletic ability with a deep understanding of the risks involved. That is why the events of June 14, 2026 came as such a shock. On that day, Lewis was conducting another tandem base jump from a 350-foot cliff in Mineral Bottom Canyon near Moab. Harnessed to him was Danny Joe Kriegel, a 68-year-old businessman, husband, father, and grandfather from Arizona. During the descent, investigators say the parachute failed to fully inflate. Both men struck a rocky hillside, and emergency responders could do nothing to save them. Both of their time on this earth ended there that day. When Flint learned that a tandem jumper had been involved in a fatal accident, he later admitted that said, "I was in shock, in tears." For many in the extreme sports community, the loss was difficult to process. Lewis had spent years demonstrating remarkable skill, while introducing countless newcomers to an experience few people would ever forget. His final jump serves as a reminder of the unique risks that remain present in a sport, where even extensive preparation and experience cannot eliminate every possible variable. The final photograph of Jade Damarrell looks like countless others you would find on pretty much anyone's social media feed. Jade was an experienced skydiver from Wales who had completed more than 500 jumps. Friends described her as energetic, adventurous, and deeply passionate about the sport. Skydiving was not a casual hobby for her. It was a major part of her life and identity, and she was respected within the community she had become part of. The day before her final jump, she had successfully completed 6 separate dives. Nothing appeared unusual about her ability or experience. On the morning of April 27, 2024, Jade arrived at the skydiving centre in County Durham and prepared for another jump. To everyone around her, it looked routine. She had made hundreds of similar descents before, but investigators would later determine that this jump was different. As Jade exited the aircraft at around 15,500 feet, she entered freefall exactly as thousands of skydivers do every day. Normally, at a predetermined altitude, a skydiver deploys their main parachute. If that fails, a secondary safety system is designed to activate automatically under certain conditions. Neither of those things happened. Jade hit the ground, and her time came to an end instantly. When investigators examined the equipment afterward, they found that both systems were fully functional. The parachutes worked exactly as designed. The automatic backup system was also capable of operating correctly. Yet, during the descent, strangely, no attempt was made to use them. The investigation also revealed that there were several other details that painted a troubling picture. Jade normally wore a camera during her jumps, but chose not to wear one that day. Authorities also discovered messages and personal final notes on her phone, including instructions regarding personal affairs and messages thanking family members for their support. The inquest later heard that Jade and her partner, whom she had met through skydiving, had ended their relationship the previous evening. For those who knew her, the loss was devastating. Her family described her as brilliant, brave, adventurous, and full of warmth. They spoke openly about the importance of compassion and support for people experiencing emotional distress, hoping that something positive might come from an otherwise heartbreaking situation. The final photograph of Adam Walsh is, on the surface, completely ordinary. It shows a smiling 6-year-old boy wearing his baseball uniform, posing proudly for what appears to be a team photograph. There is nothing unusual about it, no sign of fear, no indication that the image would become one of the most recognizable photographs in the history of missing child cases in America. That is what makes it so difficult to look at. The photograph captures a moment of complete normality, a young boy excited about baseball, a child whose biggest concerns should have been games, friends, and the long summer days stretching out ahead of him. Instead, the image became the last widely circulated photograph of Adam before his disappearance in July 1981. On July 27th, Adam accompanied his mother to a Sears department store in Hollywood, Florida. While she briefly stepped away to look at a lamp, Adam remained near a video game display where several older boys were gathered. When she returned, he was gone. At first, it seemed like the sort of situation every parent experiences at some point. A child wanders off. You search a nearby aisle. You call their name. The situation just resolves itself. But Adam never came back. What followed was every parent's nightmare. Searches were conducted throughout the store and surrounding area. Television appeals were broadcast nationwide. His parents stood before cameras pleading for information while trying to hold on to hope that their son was still alive. At the time, there was no national system for tracking missing children, and investigators had few tools available to coordinate searches across jurisdictions. Adam could have been anywhere. 2 weeks later, devastating news arrived. Adam's partial remains were discovered more than 100 miles away. The rest of his body was never recovered. For years, the case remained unresolved. Various suspects were investigated, confessions were made and later withdrawn, and crucial evidence was lost. It would take decades before authorities officially concluded that convicted serial killer Otis Toole was responsible, although he was never charged in the case. Yet Adam's story did not end there. His death fundamentally changed the way America responded when children went missing. His parents transformed unimaginable grief into action. They helped establish organizations dedicated to protecting children, advocated for major legislative reforms, and played a key role in the creation of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Years later, John Walsh would become the face of America's Most Wanted, helping law enforcement track fugitives and recover missing children across the country. Looking back at Adam's final photograph today, there is a strange contrast between what the image shows and what history remembers. The photograph is famous because it represents everything that was lost. It shows a little boy standing at the very beginning of life, smiling into a future that never arrived. More than 40 years later, that simple baseball card-style photograph remains a reminder of how quickly an ordinary day can become something that changes countless lives, and in some ways, a country forever. For most of the world, Ozzy Osbourne was the Prince of Darkness, the wild man who bit the head off a bat, the reality TV dad who constantly seemed confused by his own fame, the frontman whose voice helped create heavy metal itself. But before all of that, he was just John Michael Osbourne from Aston, Birmingham. He grew up in a small working-class house, struggled with dyslexia, left school at 15, worked a string of factory jobs, and even spent time in prison as a teenager. Music changed everything. After hearing the Beatles, Ozzy became convinced that somehow, against all odds, he was going to be a rock star. In 1968, he helped form Black Sabbath alongside Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler, and Bill Ward. Together they created a darker, heavier sound that would eventually become known as heavy metal. Albums like Black Sabbath, Paranoid, and Master of Reality transformed them from four working-class lads into one of the most influential bands in music history. Success, though, it came with a cost. For decades, Ozzy battled alcohol and substance issues. He was fired from Black Sabbath in 1979 and later admitted he believed his career was over. Instead, he reinvented himself as a solo artist, releasing classics like Blizzard of Oz, Diary of a Madman, No More Tears, and Osmosis. Along the way, he survived scandals, personal tragedies, lawsuits, health crises, and the loss of close friends. Time and again, he somehow found a way back. Then came an unexpected second act. In the early 2000s, the Osbournes introduced a completely different Ozzy to the world. Behind the larger-than-life stage persona was a husband, a father, and a grandfather whose family clearly adored him. Millions of viewers discovered that beneath the chaos was someone surprisingly warm, funny, and deeply human. By the 2020s, however, his health had begun to decline. Parkinson's disease gradually took away his mobility, and eventually he lost the ability to walk. Yet he never stopped talking about music. He never stopped planning the next project. He never stopped wanting to perform. That determination led to one final moment. On July 5th, 2025, Ozzy returned home to Birmingham for Back to the Beginning, his farewell concert alongside the original Black Sabbath lineup. More than 40,000 people filled Villa Park, while millions watched online. Physically weakened, Ozzy performed from a black throne. At several points, he visibly tried to lift himself and stand for the crowd, determined to give them everything he had left. 17 days later, he was gone. For someone who spent decades surviving the impossible, there was something fitting about the way his story ended. Back in Birmingham, surrounded by the music, the fans, and the city that made him. The final image in this video comes from the family podcast recorded during those last months. Looking at it now, it feels less like the Prince of Darkness and more like what he always was underneath. For years, Dr. Prateek Joshi lived between two worlds. In Derby, England, he worked long shifts as a radiologist at Royal Derby Hospital, building a reputation as one of the kindest doctors in the department. Colleagues said he was the sort of person who never made anyone feel like a burden. No matter how busy things became, he always had time to help, always polite, always smiling. One co-worker would later say that he knitted the department together. But while Prateek was building a life in the UK, part of his heart remained back home in India with his family. His wife was also a doctor, intelligent, respected, and deeply devoted to her children. She worked at Pacific Hospital in Udaipur while raising their 3 young kids, 8-year-old Mariah and 5-year-old twin boys, Nakul and Pradyut. Friends described them as a grounded, humble family, the kind of people who quietly made life better for everyone around them. And after years of distance and sacrifice, everything they had worked for was finally about to come together. Prateek had spent years laying the foundations for a future in England. He had adjusted to his life in Derby, embraced his work in the NHS, and slowly built stability so his family could eventually join him permanently. Then, finally, that day arrived. Omagh resigned from her hospital job. The children prepared to leave India behind and begin a completely new chapter in London. And according to the people who knew Prateek best, he was happier than anyone had seen him in years. Just days before the journey, he met friends and colleagues for dinner and spoke excitedly about the future ahead. His family would finally be with him permanently. No more long-distance parenting. No more temporary visits. They were going to live together again under one roof. This truly was to be a new beginning. On the morning of the flight, the family made their way to Ahmedabad Airport. There must have been so much excitement in those final hours. 3 young children preparing to board a plane to start a brand new life abroad. Parents thinking about schools, homes, routines, and everything still waiting ahead of them in England. At some point after boarding the aircraft, Prateek took out his phone and he captured one final family photograph. Prateek smiles into the camera beside Omagh, while across the aisle their children beam with excitement. Little Nakul and Pradyut try their best to pose properly, while Mariah smiles brightly beside them. It looks exactly like the kind of photograph thousands of families take every single day before a flight. And maybe that is why it hurts people so deeply, because it feels so familiar. Air India flight AI-171 took off from Ahmedabad on Thursday afternoon, bound for London Gatwick. On board were 242 people. People returning home, people starting over, people going to meet their loved ones. For the first few moments, everything seemed routine, but shortly after takeoff, something went terribly wrong. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner appeared to struggle as it climbed. Videos captured from the ground later showed the aircraft flying unusually low, as though it could not gain enough altitude. Then came a mayday call from the cockpit. Only 32 seconds after leaving the runway, the aircraft descended rapidly before crashing into a residential area called Meghani Nagar. A huge fireball erupted across the skyline, and within moments, hundreds of lives were changed forever. As news of the crash spread across India and the United Kingdom, families desperately searched for information. People refreshed passenger lists over and over again, praying not to find the names they feared most. Then confirmation slowly began to emerge. At Royal Derby Hospital, the shock was overwhelming. Doctors who had worked beside Prateek for years struggled to process what had happened. One colleague described feeling a darkness settle over him after hearing the news. Another said it felt like somebody had been amputated from the department. People remembered the small things about him. His newly discovered obsession with fish and chips after moving to England. His excitement about walking through the Peak District. His warmth and generosity. Former neighbours remembered how, before moving away, he arrived at their door carrying gifts, just to say goodbye properly. Tea, cakes, and even a bottle of gin. That was who he was, a man who made people feel valued. And somehow stories like this become even more painful when the people involved were so full of kindness, because there is no anger to direct the grief toward. At Derby Hindu Temple, prayers were held for the family. Friends gathered together in disbelief, trying to comfort one another while struggling to understand how something so cruel could happen so suddenly. To the world, Andre the Giant looked almost mythical, 7 feet tall and over 500 pounds. The eighth wonder of the world. He was the man Hulk Hogan body-slammed at WrestleMania 3 in front of a roaring stadium, the Giant from The Princess Bride, a wrestling icon so legendary that WWE created its Hall of Fame around him. But behind the fame, the cheers and the larger-than-life image, Andrei Rene Roussimoff was truly suffering almost every single day of his life. Even as a child, Andrei was different. He was born in rural France in 1946, weighing 13 pounds, and by the age of 12, he already stood over 6 feet tall. On his father's farm, he was strong enough to do the work of multiple men, but his size came with stares everywhere he went. People pointed, children laughed, adults whispered, and according to those close to him, that pain never truly left him. Years later, while sitting on a plane with wrestling announcer Jim Ross, Andre quietly admitted something heartbreaking. "You know, people think I have a great life, but I see them when they point at me," he said sadly. Then, according to the story, the Giant then began to cry. Andre suffered from acromegaly, a rare condition caused by a tumor that flooded his body with growth hormone. His bones continued growing unnaturally, placing unbearable pressure on his joints, spine, knees, and organs. Doctors told him surgery might help, but Andre feared treatment would shorten his wrestling career, so instead he endured the pain, and over time, it consumed him. By the late 1980s, the man who once moved like an athlete could barely walk without agony. His matches had to be carefully choreographed around his failing body. He underwent brutal back surgery. Oversized medical tools had to be specially built just for him. Friends said he lived in constant pain, and to cope with it, he drank. Not casually either, he drank legendary amounts. Stories about Andre's alcohol tolerance became wrestling folklore. Wrestlers claimed he could drink over 100 beers in a sitting. Co-stars from The Princess Bride remembered hotel bars with enormous tabs and cocktails that felt like jet fuel to ordinary people. But beneath the wild stories was a sad truth. Andre wasn't drinking for fun. He was trying to numb a body that hurt constantly. And despite being adored by millions, parts of his personal life remained painfully lonely. His relationship with his only daughter, Robin, was strained by distance and complicated family dynamics. She later admitted she only saw her father a handful of times growing up. One of Andre's closest friends would later say that not spending more time with his daughter was one of his greatest regrets. And maybe that's the tragedy of Andre the Giant. The bigger he became to the world, the smaller and more isolated his personal life seemed to become. By 1992, his wrestling career was effectively over. The once unstoppable Giant now relied on crutches just to appear at ringside. Every movement looked painful. Every step seemed heavy. His final match took place in Japan in December 1992. Just 1 month later, Andre returned to France after the death of his father. And for a brief moment, away from the arenas and cameras, he seemed like he was actually peaceful. The final known photographs of Andre the Giant were taken in Paris in January 1993. They show something very different from the unstoppable Giant that most people remembered from television. Not a wrestling attraction or superstar, instead just a tired man sitting quietly with friends, laughing softly over cards and dinner. You can see the exhaustion in his face, but you can also see warmth, almost relief, as though for a moment he was finally allowed to simply be Andre and not a giant. 3 days later, on January 27th, 1993, Andre the Giant died in his sleep from congestive heart failure. He was only 46 years old. In June 2025, 26-year-old Brazilian traveler Juliana Marines was living the dream that many people only talk about. She had left home to backpack across Southeast Asia, visiting countries including Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. Her journey eventually brought her to Mount Rinjani, a towering active volcano on the Indonesian island of Lombok that attracts thousands of hikers every year. During her trip, Juliana kept in contact with her family via text messages. This is some of what she said to her mother. "Mummy, I love you so much. I was heartbroken when we said goodbye. In fact, that's the only thing that worries me, letting you, Papi, or my sister be disappointed. Other than that, I'm not afraid of much. I was raised by a woman who can solve any problem and who is not afraid to take the plunge and go after her dreams. I'm like that too. I have different desires and dreams. I love you all very much, and I will always be grateful for all the support, care and affection. That is what makes me not afraid." On June 21st, Juliana was hiking with a group near the volcano's crater when she reportedly became exhausted and stopped to rest. According to her family, she was left behind while the rest of the group continued ahead. At some point afterward, she slipped and fell hundreds of feet down a steep ravine. What happened next captured international attention. Drone footage recorded by other hikers later showed Juliana alive after the initial fall. The video appeared to show her sitting on the mountainside, injured but conscious, far below the main trail. Reports suggested rescuers could hear her calling for help, but reaching her proved extraordinarily difficult due to the steep terrain, unstable ground, dense fog, and poor visibility. Over the following days, rescue teams repeatedly attempted to reach her. However, conditions on the mountain continued to work against them. By the time rescuers were able to relocate her position, Juliana had fallen even further down the mountainside. Search teams, drones, specialist rescuers, and government officials became involved as the story spread across Brazil and beyond. On June 24th, rescuers finally reached her. Tragically, Juliana had not survived. An autopsy later concluded that she passed from severe injuries caused by blunt force trauma and internal bleeding. Investigators stated that the injuries were consistent with a major fall and estimated that death occurred shortly after impact. Her demise sparked widespread debate about rescue procedures, mountain safety, and whether more could have been done to save her. Juliana's family publicly criticized the response and called for further investigation, while Indonesian authorities pointed to the extreme conditions that rescuers faced throughout the operation. What began as an adventure across Southeast Asia ultimately became an international tragedy, with millions of people following the desperate rescue effort and hoping that Juliana would somehow make it home. For Meenakshi Murthy and Vishnu Viswanath, travel had become a way of life. The married couple had moved from India to the United States and spent years documenting their journeys through photographs, blog posts, and social media updates. Through their travel blog, Holidays and Happily Ever Afters, they shared images from national parks, coastal viewpoints, and destinations around the world. Their growing audience followed along as the couple explored new places while building careers and a life together in America. In October 2018, the couple visited Yosemite National Park in California. One of the locations they traveled to was Taft Point, a granite overlook famous for its dramatic views of Yosemite Valley. The viewpoint sits high above the valley floor and attracts visitors from around the world, many of whom come specifically to photograph the scenery. Unlike some viewing areas, parts of Taft Point allow visitors to approach the edge without protective railings. When the couple failed to return from their trip, park officials began investigating. There was still a hope that the couple had simply gotten lost. Their bodies were eventually located, hundreds of feet below the overlook, in a steep rocky area beneath Taft Point. Recovery crews used technical climbing equipment, rappelling techniques, and helicopter support to reach the location. Investigators determined that the couple had suffered a fatal fall, but exactly how it happened remained unclear. Park officials stated that they might never know the precise circumstances that led to the incident. What made the story particularly striking was a social media post that Meenakshi had shared months earlier. Accompanying a photograph taken near the edge of the Grand Canyon, she warned about the dangers of standing near cliffs for photographs and questioned whether any picture was worth risking a life. The post would later be widely shared after news of the couple's passing spread around the world. The couple also have another final photo which later resurfaced, in which Meenakshi can be seen in the background of another tourist picture. Their final photographs remain a reminder that even the most beautiful locations can be unpredictable. Despite years of travel experience and their own warnings, what happened at Taft Point remains an unanswered question. Investigators could establish where the couple fell, but not exactly why. By 2006, Dr. Richard Root had already achieved more than most physicians could hope for in a lifetime. He had chaired departments of medicine at some of America's most respected institutions, including Yale, the University of California, San Francisco, and the University of Washington. He helped establish infectious disease programs, trained generations of doctors, and became internationally respected for his work, treating and researching infectious diseases. Colleagues described him as a gifted teacher whose influence could be found throughout modern medicine, but retirement did not slow him down. Instead, Root volunteered for a medical program in Botswana, where HIV infection rates were among the highest in the world. He spent his days treating patients, training young doctors, and teaching medical students. Friends said he was thriving. After decades in academic medicine, he found himself reconnecting with the hands-on patient care that had first inspired him to become a doctor. According to those who worked alongside him, he loved every minute of it. The day before his death, he returned from a clinic where long lines of patients had waited to receive care. His wife later recalled him becoming emotional as he described the experience. "That's why I'm here," he told her. On March 19, 2006, Root and his wife took a rare break from their work. While visiting the Tuli region of Botswana, they joined a guided canoe excursion on the Limpopo River. It was intended to be a peaceful wildlife tour through one of Africa's most beautiful landscapes. Then, everything changed. Root was traveling in the lead canoe with a guide, while his wife followed behind in another boat. Witnesses later said the canoe suddenly shook. A large crocodile, estimated to be between 13 and 15 feet long, emerged from the water and pulled him overboard without warning. His wife watched helplessly from behind as he disappeared beneath the surface. Search teams later recovered his remains near the site of the attack. He was 68 years old. What makes the story so sad is the contrast between Richard's two lives. After surviving decades in medicine, working through epidemics, teaching future physicians, and dedicating his retirement to helping others on another continent, Richard Root's life ended during a quiet afternoon, on a river he was simply trying to enjoy. For the people who knew him, however, the lasting memory was not how his time ended. It was that, right up until the very end, he was exactly where he wanted to be, helping people. The final photograph of Ryan Dunn looks like any ordinary night out. Taken inside a Pennsylvania bar, late on June 19, 2011, the image shows Dunn smiling alongside friends, drinks on show, with no signs that only a few hours later he would be gone. By that point, Dunn had already lived a life most people could only associate with chaos and adrenaline. After helping create the CKY videos alongside Bam Margera, he became one of the breakout stars of Jackass during the early 2000s. Friends nicknamed him Random Hero after his willingness to step into dangerous situations in all areas of life. Unlike some of the others though, Dunn developed a reputation for taking stunts even further than producers expected. There was nothing he wouldn't do. But that cavalier attitude meant that years of injuries slowly began catching up with him. During the filming of Jackass No. 2, Dunn suffered a serious blood clot injury after being dragged by a horse, an incident that reportedly left him physically and emotionally shaken for years afterward. I remember seeing an interview with him during this time and he was absolutely miserable. Around the same time, he was also diagnosed with Lyme disease and reportedly withdrew from many of his friends while dealing with his depression and health problems. Still, by 2011, his career now appeared to be recovering once again. Friends later said he seemed optimistic about the future, excited about new projects, and proud of how far he had come. But then came the night of June 19th. According to investigators, Dunn had spent several hours drinking at Barnaby's of America in Westchester, Pennsylvania, alongside friends including Zachary Hartwell. Witnesses later claimed he did not appear heavily intoxicated while inside the bar, though toxicology reports later revealed his blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal driving limit. Some people say he had 8 drinks. Some say he had 11 drinks. And then, shortly after 2:30 a.m., Dunn left the bar and got behind the wheel of his Porsche GT3. Zachary Hartwell was in the passenger seat. Minutes later, police estimated the vehicle reached speeds of between 130 and 140 miles per hour before veering off Route 322, smashing through a guardrail, striking a tree, and bursting into a fireball. The crash was so severe that investigators later said the car had essentially disintegrated on impact, and these pictures support that theory. Both Dunn and Hartwell's time on this earth came to a close instantly. Friends later admitted that Dunn had always driven aggressively and collected multiple speeding citations over the years, whilst friend Bam even recalled a terrifying earlier crash where Dunn flipped a car repeatedly at almost the exact same location. After Ryan's demise, Bam's mother April heartbreakingly said that deep down, she had feared for years that one day his love of fast cars would eventually catch up with him. And now the smiling photograph taken only minutes earlier suddenly becomes a haunting final image and a stark reminder to never, ever drink and drive. A single photograph taken in rural Vietnam in April 2026 has now become the center of a huge online debate. At first glance, the image doesn't seem that unusual. An old farming truck is seen slowly crossing a railway line somewhere in Dak Lak province. Inside the vehicle are a grandfather and his 2 grandchildren. But the photograph, sadly, was not taken by a bystander. It was captured by the dashcam of an oncoming passenger train just seconds before impact. According to reports, the truck was attempting to cross an unofficial railway crossing that had been built by local residents rather than train authorities. These crossings often have no warning lights, no barriers, and no staff monitoring them. As the vehicle moved onto the tracks, the SE9 train was approaching at high speed. Investigators later confirmed the conductor repeatedly sounded the horn and also applied the emergency brakes. But the stopping distance simply was not enough. The collision threw the truck violently into a nearby field. The grandfather and 1 grandchild survived with serious injuries, but 10-year-old Tien, who can be seen riding in the back of the vehicle due to limited space inside the cab, passed at the scene. There is footage which is being shared openly on social media of the moment of impact and the aftermath. I wish I hadn't seen it, nor did I want to see it, and I recommend that you all avoid watching it too. If you look closely at the image, you can make out the moment of fear on Tien's face. But there was also another controversial aspect to this whole horrifying situation. Some viewers began claiming the photograph appeared to show the grandfather sitting in the passenger seat, rather than behind the steering wheel. In Vietnam, vehicles are left-hand drive. If true, some people believed it could suggest one of the children may have been driving the truck moments before the collision. Authorities later confirmed an investigation was ongoing, but no official findings supporting those claims were publicly released. Even so, the image remains deeply unsettling, not only because it captured the exact final seconds before disaster, but because nobody looking at the photograph would immediately realize they were witnessing someone's final moment.
This is it. I mean, this is really it. This is the final curtain call. Okay?
After years of controversy, financial struggles, and relentless media attention, the king of pop appeared to be standing on the verge of a remarkable comeback. At 50 years old, he was preparing for This Is It, a series of 50 sold-out concerts at London's O2 Arena that would place him back in front of hundreds of thousands of fans. The shows carried enormous expectations. Jackson reportedly faced significant financial pressures, and the concerts were expected to generate hundreds of millions of dollars. Rehearsals had become intense, with long days spent perfecting choreography, music, and visual effects. Yet behind the scenes, concerns were growing about his physical condition. People close to the production described him as thin, exhausted, and struggling with chronic insomnia. In the weeks leading up to the concerts, there were reports of missed rehearsals and concerns from members of the production team. Some described him as anxious and emotionally fragile. Others worried that he was simply pushing himself too hard in an attempt to deliver the spectacular comeback everyone expected. Then came June 24, 2009. That evening, Jackson arrived at the Staples Center in Los Angeles for what would become his final rehearsal. Witnesses later said he seemed energetic and engaged. He rehearsed songs including Billie Jean, Thriller, and Smooth Criminal, moving across the stage with the same creativity that had made him famous decades earlier. Some members of the crew would later describe it as one of his strongest rehearsals in weeks. The rehearsal stretched past midnight. When it ended, Jackson reportedly hugged dancers, thanked crew members, and left the arena in good spirits. Photographs taken around this period would become some of the last images ever captured of him alive. They show a man who appeared tired and noticeably slimmer than in his prime, but still actively working towards a comeback that seemed just weeks away. Jackson returned to his rented home in Holmby Hills at around 1 a.m. According to later testimony, he struggled to sleep. Insomnia had reportedly plagued him for years, and his personal physician, Conrad Murray, remained at the house attempting to help him rest. Throughout the night, Murray administered various medications intended to induce sleep. However, Jackson reportedly remained awake and continued asking for propofol, a powerful anesthetic that he allegedly referred to as milk. As the morning progressed, Murray eventually administered the medication. At approximately 10:40 a.m., Jackson was given a dose of propofol while lying in bed. According to Murray's account, he briefly left the room and returned moments later to find Jackson unresponsive and struggling to breathe. Attempts were made to revive him, but the situation rapidly deteriorated.
Fire paramedic 33, what is the emergency?
Yes, sir. I need an ambulance as soon as possible, sir.
Okay, sir. What's your address?
It's 100 North Carrollwood Drive, Los Angeles, California, 90077.
You said Carrollwood?
Carrollwood Drive, yes. Sir, we have a gentleman here that needs help, and he's not breathing yet. He's not breathing, and we're trying to pump him, but he's not.
Okay. Okay, how old is he?
He's 50 years old, sir.
50, okay. He's unconscious, he's not breathing?
Yes, he's not breathing, sir.
Okay, and he's not conscious either? He's not
no,
breathing.
He's not conscious, sir.
Okay. All right, do you have him, is he on the floor? Where's he at right now?
He's on the bed, sir. He's on the bed.
Okay, let's get him on the floor.
Okay.
Okay, let's get him down to the floor. I'm going to help you with CPR right now, okay?
We need him.
Yes, we're already on our way there. We're on our way. I'm going to do as much as I can to help you over the phone. We're already on our way. Did anybody see him?
Yes, we have a personal doctor here with him, sir.
Oh, you have a doctor there?
Yes, but he's not responding to anything. No, he's not responding to CPR or anything, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, we're on our way there. If your guy's doing CPR and you're instructed by a doctor, he has a higher authority than me. And he's there on scene.
Okay.
Did anybody witness what happened?
No, just the doctor, sir. The doctor's been the only one here.
Okay, so the doctor see what happened?
Doctor, did you see what happened, sir? Sir, you just, if you can please.
We're on our way. We're on our way. I'm just passing these questions on to my paramedics while they're on the way there, sir.
Thank you, sir. He's pumping his chest, but he's not responding to anything, sir. Please.
Okay. We're on our way. We're less than a mile away, and we'll be there shortly.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Call us back if you need any help. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Emergency services were eventually called, and paramedics arrived at the home before transporting Jackson to Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. Despite extensive efforts by medical staff, he was pronounced dead later that afternoon on June 25, 2009. He was 50 years old. The investigation that followed concluded that Jackson died from acute propofol intoxication. His death was ruled a homicide, and Conrad Murray was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter. What makes Jackson's final photographs so haunting is what they represent. They were not taken during a farewell performance, a final interview, or a planned goodbye. Instead, they captured a performer preparing for the next chapter of his life, completely unaware that within hours, one of the most famous careers in entertainment history would come to an unexpected end. In September 2019, Stephen Weber and his girlfriend Kanesha Antoine were staying at an extraordinary underwater resort off the coast of Tanzania.
All right, here we are in the underwater room. Oh my gosh. There is the bed. Some fishies. Oh, there's one. There's more. Amazing. Here comes Steven.
The bedroom sat beneath the ocean's surface, surrounded by glass walls that looked out into the water. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, and for Stephen, it was the perfect place to propose. As Kanesha filmed from inside the room, Stephen disappeared beneath the water carrying a handwritten note and an engagement ring. The video shows him swimming up to the glass, smiling, excited, completely unaware that these would become the final moments of his life.
Oh, he's so cute. What?
He pressed the note against the window. I can't hold my breath long enough to tell you everything I love about you. But everything I love about you, I love more every day. Then he flipped the page over. Will you please be my wife? Moments later, he pulled an engagement ring from his pocket. It was just the perfect moment. The kind of proposal most people only dream about. The kind you see in the movies. But something went very, very wrong. Stephen never made it back to the surface. According to the resort, he drowned while free diving outside the underwater room. Staff responded to an emergency in the water, but by the time help arrived, there was nothing they could do. Kanesha later wrote that he never got to hear her answer, an answer that she said would have been, yes, 1,000,000 times, yes. What makes the footage so difficult to watch is that Stephen looks genuinely happy. There is no fear or sign that anything is wrong, just a man excited to surprise the woman he loved. In a heartbreaking tribute, Kanesha described it as the cruelest twist of fate imaginable, the best day of their lives becoming the worst. And now years later, that proposal video becomes a living reminder, a once-in-a-lifetime trip, a perfect proposal, and a final message from a man who never got to hear the answer. One of the most haunting photographs connected to the Omagh bombing was taken just minutes before the explosion. In the image, a father stands in a crowded shopping street, with his young son sitting on his shoulders. Behind them sits an ordinary red car parked outside a clothing shop. The pair are smiling, unaware that the vehicle contains hundreds of pounds of explosives. The photograph captures a perfectly normal family moment on a busy Saturday afternoon. What nobody knew at the time was that the car behind them had been abandoned by members of the real IRA and loaded with a powerful bomb. Warnings were telephoned to authorities before the explosion, but the information was confusing and inaccurate. Believing the device was closer to the courthouse, police evacuated surrounding areas and directed people toward what they believed was safety. Tragically, many were moved closer to the actual location of the bomb. At 3:10 p.m., the bomb exploded. The picture became famous after investigators recovered the camera from the devastation that followed. It was one of the final images taken before the bomb detonated in the center of Omagh on August 15, 1998. The attack came at a fragile moment in Northern Ireland's history. Just months earlier, the Good Friday Agreement had offered hope that decades of violence known as the Troubles might finally be coming to an end. Dissident Republicans opposed to the peace process sought to disrupt that progress. On that afternoon, they planted a bomb in the heart of a town filled with shoppers, families, tourists, and children. The blast tore through the crowded street, destroying shop fronts and sending glass, debris, and metal in every direction. 29 people lost their lives, and hundreds more were injured, making it the deadliest single incident of the Troubles. There is something deeply upsetting about it, because it freezes a normal moment before history changes. The father and son are not posing for a dramatic image. They are simply enjoying a day together. The photographer is capturing an ordinary memory. Nobody in the frame knows what is about to happen. The image serves as a reminder of how fragile normal life can be. 1 second, a family photograph is being taken in a crowded town centre. The next, an entire community is changed forever. And while the father and son would survive the blast, the person behind the camera never made it home. For decades, Hulk Hogan seemed larger than life. The red and yellow colours, the ripped shirts, and the almost impossible muscles. To millions of fans, he wasn't just a wrestler, he was wrestling. The final photograph of Hogan shows him only weeks before his death, older and noticeably thinner, but he was still instantly recognizable. The trademark bandana, the tan, the moustache, the face that helped turn professional wrestling into a global phenomenon. Looking at the image now, it's difficult not to notice how much he had changed from the unstoppable superhero many fans grew up watching, because behind the scenes, his body had been breaking down for decades. By 2025, Hogan had undergone an extraordinary number of medical procedures, surgeries on his back, having his shoulders and hips replaced, and multiple knee operations. Decades of punishment inside the ring had taken a heavy toll. Just months before his passing, he underwent major neck surgery. According to reports, complications from the procedure contributed to a rapid decline in his health. Friends later described hearing weakness in his voice and noticing that he was struggling physically. Then, on July 24th, 2025, everything came to an end. Hogan collapsed at his home in Clearwater, Florida. Emergency crews rushed him to hospital, but he could not be saved. He was 71 years old. The official cause of death was later revealed to be an acute myocardial infarction. That, to you and I, is a heart attack. Medical records also showed he had been living with atrial fibrillation, a condition that affects the heart's rhythm, as well as chronic lymphocytic leukemia. For most of his life, Hulk Hogan represented strength, invincibility. The idea that no matter how badly he was beaten down, he would always stand back up. But the man in that final image isn't the larger-than-life character from television. He's Terry Bollea, a husband, a father and grandfather, a flawed human being now living in reality. A man whose body had finally reached its limit after decades of punishment from all angles. And now that final photograph shows the last image of one of the most famous faces in wrestling history. A reminder that even the biggest legends eventually hear that final bell. On the afternoon of November 15th, 1982, 7-year-old Jennifer Martellis was doing something that thousands of children did every day. She was walking home from school in Tampa, Florida, and Jennifer had almost made it. She was just 1 block away from her family's home when she spoke briefly with a friend. According to investigators, Jennifer asked the friend to watch her as she continued toward her house. The friend looked away for only a moment. When she looked back, Jennifer was gone. No witnesses reported seeing a struggle. No confirmed sightings followed. Despite extensive searches, Jennifer was never found. The disappearance quickly became one of the most high-profile missing child investigations in Tampa's history. Helicopters searched the area. Detectives followed hundreds of leads. Family members on both sides were investigated and eventually cleared. Yet the central question remained unanswered. What happened during those final moments on Jennifer's walk home? Over the years, investigators focused attention on several individuals. One was Thomas Peter Welnicki, a family acquaintance who later claimed to have experienced a psychic vision describing Jennifer's disappearance. Authorities believed the account was suspicious because parts of the story appeared unusually specific, and Welnicki himself reportedly matched part of the description he provided. Despite long-standing suspicions, no charges were ever filed against him. Then, decades later, another lead emerged. A woman named Anna Cummings contacted investigators after recognizing similarities between Jennifer's case and memories from her childhood neighbor, Steve Wisnowski. The tip led police to search multiple properties in Pennsylvania using cadaver dogs, forensic specialists, and excavation teams. Investigators examined numerous locations, hoping they might finally uncover evidence that could explain Jennifer's fate. Nothing was found. Today, more than 4 decades after Jennifer vanished, the case remains unsolved. Her family continues to search for answers, still hoping that advances in forensic technology and renewed public attention may one day reveal what happened to the little girl who disappeared just steps from home. On May 31st, 2013, Richard Henderson did what he had done before. He went out to chase a storm. Unlike the professional meteorologists and research teams tracking severe weather across Oklahoma that day, Richard was simply fascinated by storms. A 35-year-old rancher, truck driver, and father of 2 boys, he enjoyed following dramatic weather when conditions allowed. That afternoon, another storm chaser photographed Richard's pickup truck near the developing storm. At that moment, nothing seemed too far out of the ordinary, at least for a storm chase. Richard was alive, excited, and doing what he loved. As the weather intensified near El Reno, Richard began communicating with his friend George Sonny Slay by phone. He sounded upbeat. He told his friend he was having fun and joked that he might even appear on television because local news crews were nearby. At around 6:05 p.m., Richard sent a photograph he had taken from his cell phone. The image showed the massive tornado beginning to take shape on the Oklahoma plains. It would become one of the final photographs he ever captured. What Richard could not have known was that he was looking at one of the most unusual and dangerous tornadoes ever recorded. The El Reno tornado was growing at an astonishing rate. Hidden behind rain, it expanded to a record-breaking width of 2.6 miles and changed direction unpredictably. Even experienced storm researchers struggled to understand what it was doing in real time. A few minutes after sending the photograph, Richard was still on the phone with Slay when a loud noise interrupted the conversation. Richard reportedly said, "It's debris hitting my pickup." His friend immediately told him to get out of there. Moments later, the call ended. Richard's truck was later found in the tornado's path. According to family, investigators believe the storm had completely emptied the vehicle during the violent encounter, including Richard. The final image that Richard sent was not taken by a scientist gathering data. He didn't have to be there. He was simply a father with a strange hobby, standing beneath the Oklahoma sky, taking a photograph of a storm that fascinated him, completely unaware that only minutes remained between that picture and his time coming to a close. This footage looks almost unbelievable. A man on a jet ski racing directly toward Niagara Falls, tourists watching, cameras recording, everyone believing that there must be a plan to this madness. And there was. But unfortunately, it didn't work. On October 1st, 1995, 39-year-old Robert Overacker launched a jet ski into the Niagara River and began heading toward the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment stunt. According to reports, he had been planning it for years. His goal was to raise awareness for homelessness through a daring public spectacle. Thousands of people were gathered around the falls that day. Many watched in disbelief as Overacker accelerated toward one of the most powerful waterfalls on Earth. His plan was incredibly simple and incredibly risky. He would ride the jet ski over the edge of the falls, then deploy a rocket-propelled parachute strapped to his back. The parachute would carry him safely into the river below, where rescuers could then retrieve him. Simple. As he reached the brink, he activated the device. For a split second, everything seemed to be happening exactly as planned. Then, disaster struck. The parachute failed. Some reports state it failed to deploy properly. Others suggest a fatal mistake during preparation meant the parachute was not properly attached to him at all. Either way, the result was the same. His only chance of survival disappeared in an instant. His brother and a friend watched helplessly as he plunged over the falls. What happened next confused many witnesses. From a distance, it initially appeared as though Overacker had somehow survived. Something could be seen moving in the rapids below, but rescuers soon realized the truth. The powerful water was simply moving his body through the current. He was later recovered from the river and pronounced dead. Today, the footage remains one of the most haunting videos ever recorded at Niagara Falls. A man carrying out years of planning, racing toward a dream of helping the homeless community, only for a single mistake to make him go down in history for a very different reason. For most people in Southborough, Massachusetts, October 13, 2005, is a date they will never forget. It was the night two sisters, Shauna and Megan Murphy, were involved in a devastating incident that would leave a permanent mark on their family, their school, and their community. Years later, people still spoke about where they were when they heard the news. Even the local fire chief would later admit that not a day went by without him thinking about it. The final photograph in this case shows the sisters together before everything changed. Looking at it now, you can imagine these two going on to live long and happy lives. But that was not to be. Shauna was 17 years old. Megan was 15. They were exceptionally close, sharing friends, interests, clothes, and the kind of bond that many siblings never experience. Friends described them as energetic, popular, compassionate, and full of life. At school, they were involved in sports, academics, and extracurricular activities. Shauna had recently been working on college applications and had taken the SAT. Megan excelled in soccer, basketball, and lacrosse, while consistently achieving strong grades. Their future appeared wide open. During the evening of October 12th, the sisters attended a gathering with friends before beginning the short drive home. Just after 1 a.m., the Land Rover they were traveling in left the road and struck a utility pole on Northborough Road. The impact was catastrophic. When emergency crews arrived, they found the vehicle upside down and impaled on the broken utility pole. Live power lines had fallen across the wreckage, sending sparks and electrical arcs around the vehicle. According to first responders, someone inside was still calling for help, but rescuers could not immediately reach the occupants because touching the vehicle could have resulted in electrocution. They were forced to wait until the electricity could be shut off before beginning rescue efforts. Shauna and Megan did not survive. Their friend Melissa Smith, who had been traveling with them, suffered serious injuries but lived. As investigators pieced together the hours leading up to the collision, witness statements painted a complicated picture. Several people reported seeing alcohol at the gathering earlier that evening, while others recalled concerns about whether Shauna should have been driving. Investigators also examined the role of speed. According to later findings, the vehicle was traveling significantly faster than the posted limit before the crash occurred. The story continued to attract attention long after the funeral services ended. Questions surrounding the gathering, the investigation, and whether charges should be pursued generated public debate throughout Massachusetts. Yet for the Murphy family, the focus was obviously loss and grief. Years later, Shauna and Megan's father would speak openly about the tragedy. He reflected on how important conversations about safe driving can be, and admitted that warnings about excessive speed had not been something regularly discussed. Rather than retreat from public life, the family established the Murphy Sisters Foundation, which works to educate young drivers and provide crash prevention training for students. In many ways, that has become the sisters' legacy. Not simply the crash that ended their lives, but the effort to ensure other families never received the same devastating phone call. Today, over 2 decades later, students who attend their former school were not even born when the accident happened, yet the story remains part of the community's memory. The flowers, the memorials, the scholarships, and the lessons continue long after that final photograph was taken. Shauna and Megan Murphy were young, hopeful, inseparable, and completely unaware of how quickly everything was about to change. When you're young, it's so easy to think that you are invincible. I've done many, many dumb things in my youth, and I'm grateful that I'm still here to tell the tale. But one thing that has no exceptions is do not ever, ever drink and drive. On New Year's Day, 2026, what began as a celebration in a crowded Swiss nightclub became one of the deadliest fires in the country's modern history. At approximately 1:26 a.m., hundreds of young people were gathered inside Le Constellation, a popular bar and nightclub in the ski resort town of Crans-Montana. Many were celebrating the arrival of the new year when a waitress carrying champagne bottles fitted with sparklers moved through the venue. According to investigators, the sparklers were raised too close to the ceiling. Within moments, the ceiling caught fire. You are seeing that very moment. Witnesses described how quickly the situation escalated. Attempts to extinguish the flames failed almost immediately. Within seconds, smoke began pouring from the building. Experts believe highly flammable acoustic foam attached to the ceiling helped the fire spread at an extraordinary speed. The blaze rapidly developed into what is known as a flashover event, where nearly everything combustible inside a room ignites almost simultaneously. Panic followed. Many people inside the basement nightclub rushed toward a narrow staircase leading to the main exit. Survivors later described scenes of chaos as crowds attempted to escape. Some people smashed windows to get out, while others became trapped as the fire and smoke spread through the building. Investigators later reported that many victims were found near the main exit area, suggesting they had been only moments away from safety. Emergency services arrived within minutes. More than 150 personnel, dozens of ambulances and multiple helicopters were deployed as hospitals across the region struggled to cope with the scale of the disaster. In total, 41 people lost their lives, and more than 100 others were injured, many suffering severe burns. Half of those who succumbed to the smoke and fire were under the age of 18. As investigators examined the wreckage, troubling questions emerged. Reports suggested potential fire safety deficiencies, including concerns about flammable materials, emergency exits, and missed inspections. Criminal investigations were later launched into the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. The disaster became a national tragedy. A night that should have brought in the beginning of a new year instead ended in heartbreak, leaving dozens of families mourning loved ones who had simply gone out to celebrate with friends. Every year in Nevada's Black Rock Desert, tens of thousands of people gather around a giant wooden figure known simply as the Man. As night falls, the structure is set alight in front of a roaring crowd. Music echoes through the desert, fireworks explode overhead, and for many people at Burning Man, the ceremony represents renewal, a symbolic ending, the start of something new. But in 2017, that celebration turned into something far darker, because among the crowd that night was a 41-year-old man named Aaron Joel Mitchell, and within moments his name would become tied forever to one of the most disturbing incidents in the festival's history. Aaron had traveled to Burning Man from Switzerland, where he lived with his wife. Friends and family described him as deeply compassionate, the kind of person who would give away his last dollar if someone else needed it more. His brother Micah later said he only knew love and nothing else. That is important to remember, because after what happened, the internet quickly reduced him to a single horrifying moment. But before that night, he was a husband, a brother, a son, a human being, and nobody truly knows what was happening inside his mind in those final seconds. On the night of the burn, nearly 50,000 people surrounded the massive wooden effigy. Security teams formed human barriers around the flames, something they did every year to stop people from getting too close. Witnesses later described the atmosphere as surreal. Explosions lighting up the desert sky while the towering structure burned brighter and brighter. Then, suddenly, a man broke through the outer perimeter, then the second. At first, many people thought it was part of the performance, but it wasn't. Witnesses said Aaron sprinted toward the flames, while firefighters and rangers desperately tried to stop him. 2 responders reportedly dove toward him in the dirt, but missed by seconds. And then, in front of thousands of horrified people, Aaron disappeared into the fire. What happened next unfolded in chaos. Parts of the burning structure began collapsing, making rescue attempts incredibly dangerous. Emergency crews were forced to wait for debris to fall before they could safely reach him. When they finally pulled him from the flames, he was airlifted to a burn center in California. He passed away the following morning. Authorities later confirmed there was no alcohol in his system. Toxicology reports were discussed publicly, but to this day, no one truly knows why he ran into the fire. And that uncertainty became part of the tragedy. Some people immediately rushed to speculate online. Others just straight up blamed him. But his family would later see those comments while grieving someone they loved. And maybe that's the part people forget. Behind every viral image or shocking headline, there are real human beings left behind to carry the pain. Aaron's brother later shared a message online that stopped many people in their tracks. He was truly selfless, humble, compassionate, and cared about everyone. Then he added something even more heartbreaking. It breaks my heart knowing that he will be remembered by one terrible mistake, and not the good, kind-hearted person he was. And perhaps that is what makes the final photographs and videos from that night so haunting. Not just the image of a man running toward flames in the middle of the desert, but the knowledge that nobody watching truly understood what they were witnessing. Whether Aaron was experiencing overwhelming emotional pain, a mental health crisis, confusion, or something nobody else could see, we may never know. What we do know is that thousands of people watched a human life end in one of the most public and traumatic ways imaginable. And somewhere far away from the desert, a family received the kind of phone call that changes everything, forever. The photograph remained online for only a few minutes before moderators removed it. But for the people who saw it, the image became impossible to forget. An 18-year-old student stood inside an empty classroom in Moscow, staring directly into the camera, with a strange, almost unreadable expression on his face. Behind him, lying motionless across a desk, was his teacher. What disturbed people most was how the teenager looked. Rather than trapped in a rage or suffering from shock and just staring into space, he looked totally fine. And what nobody looking at that photograph realized at the time was that the person posing in the picture would also only have moments left on this earth. His name was Andrei Emelianikov. To the people who knew him, he did not seem dangerous. Friends and classmates described him as quiet, withdrawn, and polite. He rarely argued with people or stood out. He enjoyed science fiction novels, video games, music, and archery. One friend later said he tended to keep all of his emotions trapped inside himself, rather than talking openly about what he was feeling. Another classmate remembered him as someone who never raised his voice. Nothing about him appeared especially alarming on the surface level. But underneath that exterior, something may already have been collapsing. In 2017, Andrei was studying at the West Complex Continuing Education College in Moscow. One of his instructors was a 44-year-old teacher named Sergei Danilov, a retired army officer and father of 3 children. Students pretty much all described Danilov as strict but fair. He pushed students hard, but many also remembered the educator as supportive and patient. One former student later said, "He was like a father to us." Others described him as the kind of teacher who always gave struggling students another opportunity to improve. However, according to classmates, tension had developed between the teacher and student after the teenager began missing classes. Reports suggested the teacher had warned him about possible expulsion if things did not improve. Exactly how deeply that conflict affected Andrei That remains unclear, and there is no definitive motive for what's happened next. On the afternoon of November 1st, during a break between lessons, the atmosphere inside the college seemed completely normal. Students moved through hallways as they always did. Teachers prepared for the next class, and somewhere inside the building, Andrei followed Danilov into an empty classroom. Most students nearby later said they heard nothing unusual to suggest what was happening. At some point during those moments, the teacher was attacked with a sharp kitchen tool, and his time was ended right there inside the classroom. Afterwards, Andrei took several photographs at the scene and uploaded them to his social media account. Then came the final image, the selfie. What emotion are you seeing on his face? What do you think he was thinking as the camera captured his image? Just moments after this selfie was taken, Andrei's time on this earth, it also drew to a close. He met his end by his own hand, with the aid of the circular saw that we can see in the background. In the days afterwards, the school brought in psychologists to help traumatized students to process what had happened. Meanwhile, the internet exploded with speculation. Some blamed violent media, others focused on disturbing online communities and horror-themed forums he had reportedly visited. Friends said Andrei spent much of his time immersed in online subcultures. They said that he reportedly used imagery from My Little Pony on social media, so to some degree he was a brony. He was also fascinated by the Silent Hill character, Walter Sullivan, a fictional killer consumed by isolation and delusion. Looking back now, those interests took on a far darker meaning after the attack. But the people who actually knew Andrei the best said that there was simply no answer. On April 10th, 2025, a family visiting New York City set out on what was supposed to be a memorable sightseeing flight. Just minutes later, it would end in tragedy. Among those on board was Agustin Escobar, a senior Siemens executive who had recently become CEO of rail infrastructure at Siemens Mobility. Traveling with him were his wife, Mercy Camprubi Montal, also a Siemens executive, and their 3 children, aged 4, 8 and 10. The family had flown from Barcelona and were reportedly combining a business trip with a family holiday. They were also celebrating Mercy's 40th birthday. Before the flight, a photograph captured the family smiling in front of the helicopter. None of them could have known it would become the final image ever taken of them together. The Bell 206 helicopter took off from Lower Manhattan at approximately 2:59 p.m. The route followed a popular sightseeing path, passing landmarks including the Statue of Liberty before heading north toward the George Washington Bridge. Around 15 minutes into the flight, something went catastrophically wrong. Witnesses reported hearing a loud boom before seeing parts of the aircraft break apart as it descended toward the Hudson River. One witness said the tail section appeared to detach before the helicopter flipped and fell toward the water. Emergency crews rushed to the scene within minutes. Rescue boats entered the river, and first responders immediately began life-saving efforts. However, the damage was too severe. 4 victims were pronounced dead at the scene, while 2 others were later pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. The pilot, Sean Johnson, a former Navy serviceman who had recently achieved his dream of becoming a commercial helicopter pilot, also lost his life. The accident shocked Spain, the US, and the international business community. Colleagues described Escobar as an accomplished leader and, above all, a devoted family man. Friends and relatives remembered a family known for their warmth, ambition, and close bond. One of the most heartbreaking details emerged afterward. The couple's daughter was due to celebrate her 9th birthday the following day. Investigators later recovered large sections of the wreckage from the Hudson River, but the exact cause of the crash remains under investigation. What began as a routine tourist flight over one of the world's most famous skylines instead became one of the deadliest helicopter accidents New York City had seen in years. In May 2000, residents of the Boyacá region of Colombia witnessed one of the most disturbing cases of extortion in the country's history. Elia Cortez, a dairy farmer living in a rural area near Chiquinquirá, was at home with her husband when armed criminals forced their way inside. According to reports, the intruders claimed they had kidnapped the couple's daughter and demanded money. To enforce their demands, They secured an explosive device around Elvia's neck and ordered her to obtain the ransom. As Elvia travelled into town, the unusual metal collar quickly attracted attention. Concerned citizens alerted authorities, and police soon realised they were dealing with a live explosive device. The area was secured and bomb disposal specialists were called to the scene. For hours, officers and technicians worked desperately to remove the device. The situation was made even more difficult by the bomb's sophisticated design. Investigators later determined that it contained multiple triggering mechanisms intended to make disarming it extremely dangerous. As the rescue attempt continued, crowds gathered at a distance, while emergency personnel focused on saving Elvia's life. Then, without warning, the device detonated. The explosion claimed Elvia's life and also that of a bomb disposal technician who had been working selflessly to free her. Several other officers and military personnel were seriously injured in the blast. The incident shocked Colombia and quickly became international news. At the time, the country was already dealing with widespread violence, kidnappings, and extortion linked to various armed groups and criminal organizations. Even against that backdrop, the attack stood out. Because of its unusual cruelty and complexity, responsibility for the crime was never conclusively established. Early reports blamed guerrilla groups operating in the region, but investigators were unable to definitively attribute the attack to any specific organization. More than 2 decades later, the Boyacá necklace bomb incident remains one of the most infamous extortion cases ever recorded. The image of Elvia standing helplessly while specialists raced against time to save her, became a grim symbol of the dangers faced by ordinary civilians during one of the most violent periods in Colombia's modern history. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.